What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Second Order Fantasy Football, where we look at the second order effects of moves that happen in the NFL and how that impacts the fantasy landscape. So we're going to go over all the moves that happened today, recording this video March 9th, and then going over some moves that happened the last few days and some of their key takeaways. So the big move from today is Carson Wentz is getting traded to the now Washington Commanders. So there's news that came out that Washington was interested in Russell Wilson, and they probably made a big pitch for him that apparently Seattle didn't really listen. And my guess is that it's because Russell Wilson didn't want to go there. So they kind of had to pivot from there and are deciding to pivot towards Carson Wentz, who the Indianapolis Colts were pretty much done with after the way he folded in that game they needed to clinch a playoff berth with against Jacksonville, the worst team in the league, and Wentz pretty much came up flat. So Wentz is now heading to Washington. And I am a Washington fan, and to be honest with you, I am not a fan of this move at all. I do not like Carson Wentz. I think he is a very physically talented player, but when it comes to the clutch and situations that you need him to perform well, he generally does not do well, which is very similar to a quarterback that Washington had in the past, Kirk Cousins, who I think is a better quarterback than Carson Wentz, but Washington decided not to pay. That is a whole separate other issue that I could rant about forever. But I do think that this does give Washington a little bit of an upgrade in terms of the potential that they have on this team, but my fear is that there really isn't much difference between the production that Wentz will give this team versus what Taylor Heinicke gave this team. Washington wants to operate in a system where everything is very controlled. They're managing the clock. They're running the ball. They're playing great defense. And my fear is that there's really not going to be a lot of opportunity for Carson Wentz to put up great numbers. So in terms of a quarterback that I'm looking at for fantasy football, I'm really not interested in Wentz. That being said, I don't think that his market will be particularly high compared to the other quarterback options out there. I don't think he is draftable, in my opinion, but if he is somebody that is available, I'm definitely interested in him. I think this potentially raises the ceiling for some of the other guys. Antonio Gibson is going to be the real stud on this team if he can find a way to stay consistently healthy, which has been an issue for him so far. Terry McLaurin has some potential as well, but I do not feel that Terry McLaurin is really in a situation where he is great value to have. He had a very disappointing season in 2021, and I think a lot of that is because Washington really doesn't have a lot of other targets on that team, so they could pretty much just zero in on McLaurin and shut him down. So I am not convinced that Wentz will really make a huge difference for this offense. I think it's going to basically be a running team. You're going to have Antonio Gibson, maybe Jared Patterson if they get him more involved. Depends on what they decide to do on J.D. McKissic if they want to bring him back. But some of these wide receivers that they have, like Terry McLaurin, Curtis Samuel, if they decide to bring him back, I don't think these guys are really great value to go after. And if anything, the move to Carson Wentz could kind of hype up these guys' value. But as we kind of saw with players like Michael Pittman, I think Michael Pittman is kind of on the same tier as Terry McLaurin in terms of talent, but he had kind of an inconsistent fantasy season too. So I'm worried that this will kind of increase the hype for McLaurin more than is really going to be the actual output. And then for tight end, Logan Thomas appears he won't be back just because of the injuries that he's dealing with. It's going to take some time for him to recover, so I would generally stay away from this tight end room. Indianapolis, so we don't know who their quarterback is going to be, so a lot of questions there. But my fear is that this could actually hurt Jonathan Taylor's impact. If, let's say, Indianapolis goes from Carson Wentz to Mitch Trubisky, who is kind of the guy that they're rumored to take control of this offense and the guy that they'll go after, I still feel like I know Mitch Trubisky is kind of that hot name right now because he's a backup that's waiting, but he really has been quite inconsistent. So for Indianapolis' sake, I'm not really sure if this is going to hurt Jonathan Taylor in terms of teams are going to zero in on him and dare Trubisky to beat them down the field. So it potentially could cause some issues for Jonathan Taylor in terms of how he performs now that they don't have Carson Wentz there. if they downgrade. But if they could very well upgrade and get a rookie quarterback. Let's say they get Malik Willis, and Malik Willis is the next big thing and takes over this offense and things really pop. It could be great for Jonathan Taylor, but it definitely throws some more question marks into it. I wouldn't really panic on Jonathan Taylor is what I'm trying to say, but I'm just saying is that I would not be surprised if this could potentially negatively impact him. Same goes for Michael Pittman. I think he's really the only wide receiver of note in this offense that I want to talk about here unless we get more clarity on who the quarterback is, because Michael Pittman is pretty much locked and loaded as the one. T.Y. Hilton is there, but he's aging and really not worth much fantasy value at this point. But yeah. Other news for Indianapolis while I'm talking about them, Jack Doyle retired. So this potentially opens up some things for Mo Alley Cox in this offense. He's getting more involved, very physically talented former basketball player. Could be some good news for him in terms of his fantasy output. So some other moves that have happened over the last 2 days that I want to talk about in some brief fantasy overview. Now we've gone through the Wentz situation. Davante Adams, franchise tag with the Packers. I kind of already talked about him in my Aaron Rodgers video about we can expect pretty much the same thing that we've seen in Green Bay with Davante Adams and Aaron Rodgers. So great news for him. Not going to really talk about that too much. Mike Williams returning to the Chargers. Good news for them. I think that, Keenan Allen, great slot receiver, but they really are at their best when they can have Mike Williams opposite of him to catch some deep targets. Mike Williams is inconsistent in fantasy, but he did have an incredible start to this past season, and you can hope that if Mike Williams stays healthy, he dealt with an injury midseason, and Justin Herbert takes another leap forward, which is very possible in my opinion. Mike Williams could be a great receiver, so good news for him as well. Godwin returning to Tampa Bay for this upcoming season. I honestly am kind of surprised that they decided to tag him, but I do think that this is good news for them. I just have a question of whether or not Godwin will even be back by the season with a late end of the year ACL tear, but I can kind of see them wanting to franchise tag him and then see if he can come back healthy. But I'm just a little surprised that he didn't want to try to test the market, but ultimately if they franchise tagged him, they didn't really have much of a choice. He didn't have much of a choice. The team just did this for him. Don't really see him as a great fantasy asset for 2022, but he is a name to keep in mind late in the season if he were to come back from injury. Tight ends that were tagged. So Dalton Schultz going to be coming back to Dallas. This is good news for them, especially if Amari Cooper leaves. The reason I didn't highlight the Amari Cooper news is because we don't have any word that he was officially released. So I don't want to make videos about fantasy speculating things until they actually happen, because we've seen this game with Aaron Rodgers and all the news that he created about going to Denver, and that never happened. So until things officially happen, I'm not going to talk about it. But anyway, let's say they do release Amari Cooper, this opens up some opportunities for Dalton Schultz, who was a very good tight end who you got in late rounds. And I think you can still get great value for him this year because he's got some name value to him, and he's probably going to get drafted, but he's not going to be drafted particularly high. And if they decide to move on with CeeDee Lamb, Gallup, if they bring him back, Gallup has also got an injury though. Cedric Wilson, they bring him back. There's a lot of opportunity potentially for Dalton Schultz, so this could be a great sleeper in fantasy. Another great sleeper tight end who just got tagged, but for different reasons, is Mike Gesicki, returning to Miami. The reason I like Mike Gesicki is because their head coach that they just got, Mike McDaniel, coming from San Francisco, and as their offensive coordinator, we've seen what he can do with George Kittle as their tight end. So if he brings in a similar system that is very tight end heavy like San Francisco has with Kittle, Gesicki could very well benefit from that. And this presents a lot of great opportunity for him to step into this offense and really make quite a difference. Some other news of some other positions that are I'm kind of going through this in terms of priority for the way I view them. Offensive tackle moves, both Cam Robinson for Jacksonville and Orlando Brown for Kansas City were tagged. I think this is good for these teams because these are some good tackles they have here. They just need to talk Jacksonville first. They need to shore up a lot of things on this team, but bringing back a talented tackle instead of letting him hit the market is good for Trevor Lawrence as he goes through his development, but they need some more pieces around him to really start taking them seriously. For Kansas City, it's good because this is a team that has had some iffy offensive line play at times, and now that they're going to be bringing Orlando Brown back, though, it kind of confirms that this is a team that can still be very competitive. I didn't really have a huge fear of them moving on from him and not replicating fantasy success, but it's good they are trying to retain their line. Josh Reynolds coming back to Detroit. So I don't think this is really good news for Josh Reynolds necessarily, as it more so is that they trust Amon-Ra St. Brown as their number one guy going into this next season at the wide receiver core. They're not going to try to draft a rookie. There was a couple of Detroit receivers that were impending free agents, and my fear was that in terms of Amon-Ra St. Brown owners is that they're trying to draft a rookie that's a big play receiver to kind of take away or to kind of step into those shoes that they're filling. But bringing back some of these veteran guys like Reynolds, it shows that they trust Amon-Ra St. Brown as their one and bring back these other fundamental players that know the system well to continue to build around. Defensive moves. So Bobby Wagner leaving Seattle. This is going to potentially open up a void for some team to pick him up in free agency and make some moves to improve their defense. Who could that team be? Could be the Cincinnati Bengals. They have the third most cap space going into the season, and the cap just increased by $20 million. So Cincinnati, their big move is that they brought back Jesse Bates, their safety, who is very underrated. But they're going to have a lot of room to shore up their offensive line, for one. Also to bring in some more playmakers on defense, things like that. So they could really take a jump in terms of free agency. I expect them to be big players, and I'll be talking about them, I expect to, within the next few weeks. That's all I've got for this video. Once again, if you're interested, please consider subscribing. If you enjoy fantasy football content, I make fantasy football videos pretty often. You could check it out in the playlist that I have attached at the end of this video. I have some strategy videos from last year if you're interested in that, about the way I play fantasy football, what I'm looking for. My goal now is to just kind of go through the news this offseason and then kind of implement some of the strategies as we get closer to the football season. Also have some other content too on this channel. Check it out if you're interested in the description below. All right, I'll see you guys next time. Bye.